Welcome to the next installment in my video lecture series for microeconomic principles. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to be taking a look at the minimum wage controversy. So if we take a look here, we have a labor market. We have our downward sloping demand curve. So for example, there's an inverse relationship between the wage rate and the number of workers that companies want to hire. So at higher wages, they want to hire fewer people, and at lower wages, they want to hire more people. We also have an upward sloping supply curve. This reflects that as wages increase, the number of people who want to work increases, and as the wage rate decreases, fewer people want to work at those lower wages, and the equilibrium occurs where the demand for labor and the supply of labor intersect one another, and that gives us the equilibrium wage rate and the equilibrium number of people, or units of labor that are being utilized. And at that wage rate, W asterisk, the demand for the quantity of labor demanded is equal to the quantity supplied of labor. So let's assume that we're starting at this equilibrium position, and then we have a minimum wage law that's passed that institutes a minimum wage that is above the equilibrium wage rate. So we have here WMW, so that's the wage rate, the minimum wage rate, MW for minimum wage. So if we take from that point here at that wage rate and we draw a line across, give us an implication of what actually occurs here. So if we follow that minimum wage rate until the first thing we hit is the demand curve. So that gives us the number of units of labor that firms will demand at that wage rate. And let me change the color of that and make it a dotted line. So if we follow the minimum wage across, we hit the demand curve. That tells us how much labor is demanded. So let me duplicate that and cheat a little bit and move that over here. Excuse me. So that will be LD. That'll be the units of labor that are demanded. Well, let me move that so it looks a little bit better. There we go. So if we follow the minimum wage over, we hit the demand curve, and if we go straight down, that tells us at that wage rate, this is how many units of labor that companies want to hire at that minimum wage rate. If we continue along the minimum wage and go to where we hit the supply curve, that will tell us how much labor will be supplied at that minimum wage. So if we go from that point straight down, that will give us the labor that is supplied at that minimum wage. So let me cheat a little bit. So that is the amount of labor that is supplied. So we can see at this minimum wage that the amount of labor that is supplied is greater than that is demanded. So we have a surplus of labor. We could also break this surplus down into some additional units here. And let me draw in another line here, make it a little bit easier to see. And we draw a line further up here. These are just to make it more visually appealing for you to take a look at. So remember that prior to the introduction of the minimum wage, this is the amount of labor that was demanded and supplied. Now the amount demanded is at LD, which is less than that. So what that does is that gives me an indication of how many people who used to have a job when the wage rate was set by the labor market. Wrong one there. That distance there gives us the people who end up getting laid off. And let me just make that a little bit bigger so it's easier for people to see. That tells us that this is the amount of people who were originally working, but at the higher wage rate, companies demand much less than that. So those are the people who are going to get laid off because of the institution of that minimum wage. But we also have additional impact on unemployment due to the fact that as the wage rate goes up, more and more people will supply labor. So there were some people who were not in the labor force, who weren't working and weren't even looking for work. But now that the wage rate has increased because of the minimum wage law, these people enter into the labor market. So let me show that part right there and do the same thing here. Again, the wrong one. And you duplicate that. And these are going to be the new labor market entrants. These people are entering the labor market because the wage rate has now increased because of the passage of the minimum wage law. So make sure you're aware of that if you set the minimum wage above the equilibrium wage rate, some economists will argue that this causes unemployment. And it causes unemployment on two separate parts. There are people who were working who get laid off because companies are going to react to the higher minimum wage. They're going to hire fewer people than at the original equilibrium wage rate. So some people will get laid off and they will become unemployed. There's a secondary component to this, that as the wage rate increases, more and more people will enter the labor market, but they will be unable to find jobs, so therefore they are unemployed. So make sure you realize that the argument and the controversy of this, that some economists will assert that an institution of a minimum wage will cause unemployment, and that there are two components of the unemployment that is caused. The people who are laid off, who used to work and are no longer working, and the individuals who enter into the labor market because the wage rate has increased, but they are unable to find employment at that higher wage rate. The example that is given recently in the news is that a lot of fast food chains are eliminating order takers at their establishments and putting in ordering kiosks, that you don't even interact with a person. You go up to a computer screen and you order what you want, and that order gets sent to the kitchen and it gets processed. So the individuals who used to take your order are no longer being employed. They get laid off because their jobs are being replaced by technology. So if the minimum wage rate increased, the reaction of some of these fast food chains is to eliminate those jobs and replace those individuals with technology, i.e. the ordering kiosks that you end up seeing.